How much is too much to pay for a top transfer portal player?
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith. Today's podcast is going to focus on the NIL money and the opportunities to land top players out of the transfer portal, when and when not to do it. This podcast can be found wherever you get your pods for free on YouTube and anywhere else you get them. Part of the awesome Locked On Network, your team each and every day. Please like and subscribe, share, and whatever you do, please comment on this podcast. I would love to hear from you. So let's dive in. The reason I had this podcast today was a post by Pete Thamel on X, and I'm just going to read it to you. It's about Damen Martinez, ironically, DJ Uiagalelei, the transfer from Oregon State to Florida State. His running back this past year with the Beavers is the player in question. Sources: Oregon State star running back Damen Martinez has informed Oregon State coaches he intends to enter the transfer portal. He was set to make more than $400,000 to play at Oregon State this year. Now, to put things in perspective, I've got his stats up as well. And this is a 2-year player for the Beavers that was really, really good. He's out of Lewisville, Texas. Wasn't recruited as highly as he probably should have been. Lewisville is basically the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and he is really good. 161 carries, 982 yards, 6.1 yards per carry, 7 touchdowns as a true freshman. And then this past season, 194 attempts, 1,185 yards, 6.1 yards again, and 9 more touchdowns. So obviously, if he's leaving and giving up $400K or more, whatever the reports may be, that's not important. He's making some coin. That's what's relevant. So I have a couple of topics / questions. You can pose them however you see fit. But this is something that Mike Norvell and Florida State has to think about every day. And before anybody asks, I have no idea if Florida State is even making any overtures, DJ or otherwise. They're loaded at running back, so I doubt it. I'm using this as a general barometer. But just hear me out. Should Florida State, in a year that let's be realistic, they're not a national title contender this next year, barring something really transcending with DJ. He's not an elite quarterback. They're not as talented as Georgia and a few other schools. Should they still try to go in and win as many games as possible? Of course. But do you spend all your money on NIL on this year when you're probably going to be better in years to come? There's a lot of different ways to look at this. So my point on the original question is to say, how much is enough where you have to bow out for a top player? But the key here, it's not for the top player. It's the top player and the year you're doing it. If you don't have an elite team, should you go out and do that? It's a really tough question because fans always think that their team has a chance. I'm telling you, this is not going to be a national title team this next year. I'm sure I'm going to get comments saying otherwise, but this isn't just my opinion. This is people in Vegas. This is people I know closer to the program than me, etc. I think this is a little bit further away from that, more like a 9-10 win team than an 11-1, 12-0 team. Take it for what it's worth. Everybody's opinion is just that. But on the other side, there's something else to think about it. I don't know anything about Damen Martinez as for personality, but like Quintin Judkins went from Ole Miss to Ohio State. And Ohio State thinks they have a chance at the title, but Quintin is a locker room cancer. From what I know about Norvell and his staff, I would be very surprised if they'd go after him. Even though he's from the state of Alabama, he lived just outside of Montgomery, went to Pike Road High School. It's an area Florida State recruits. But I don't think they would have taken a kid like that. Culture. And it goes into the second point. I've talked many times about Kirby Smart's comments after the bowl game against Florida State and in general. Him and Nick hated NIL in general because they're worried about the locker room. That's what I've heard. They're not going to openly say that because they don't want to screw up recruiting. But it's not stupid either. I understand the point. If your locker room is intact, if it is on the same page, it's easier to coach the players. It's not really hard to follow that trail. So should Florida State in a year like this, if they have another need, like they need depth at linebacker, if a big-time linebacker comes open to the portal from April 16th to the 30th, that's the next window. It's coming up on us fast. It's just over a week away, and we'll be in the middle of it. Should Florida State go out, spend $400,000 or $500,000 on a top linebacker? What about a kid that maybe could be another really good defensive lineman. You can never have enough of them. Maybe the best safety in the portal from the spring, something like that. I don't know. I don't think Florida State secondary needs a lot of help, but everybody wants more and more defensive players. You just got to rotate more of them. And again, how much is too much in a year you're probably not going to win the national title? These are interesting questions because I think Florida State is on the cusp of being a really dominant program starting in 2025 on. The roster will have enough high school talent, elite players out of the, I think they'll have another top 10 class this year. They'll have enough players out of the portal too to kind of cement that. But you got to get more high school kids, which they started to do in the 24 class. And then Norvell will have several good quarterbacks on his roster, like I just talked about Tramel Jones the last couple of shows and how well he did at Elite 11 and why this will be the third year in a row they've got an Elite 11 quarterback. That matters. So how much would you pay for like a top middle linebacker or will linebacker, outside linebacker to come to Florida State and play in 24? Again, if you think you're a national title contender, it's a different story. And that's really the crux that I think this is. Because I had somebody ask me, like, how much would you pay in this stuff? And I said, well, it depends on your team. Do you have a shot at the title? Why in the hell would you pay when your team doesn't have a shot? Look at MLB. They dump salary so fast, it's not even funny, and have fire sales and trade for minor league prospects that have a chance, and many of them won't even make the big leagues because it's just about saving money for when they have a better chance to make an all-in run at winning a World Series. It's no different in college football now. It's sad as it is, with the idiotic rules and no penalty for transfer, teams can just go recruit kids off other rosters. And believe me, that's what's going on. But you still got to pay to get some of these guys, or they're not going to leave. How much would you pay for a top middle linebacker? Would you go $400K like Damen Martinez had? Would you go more? If you're a team like Ohio State or Georgia who's better suited and you thought you needed one more player, and again, pick the position, would you spend that money? Do you worry about the locker room? There are so many questions and so many ways to look at it. I think it's intriguing. But again, I think the first point is still the same. Be realistic. Are you or are you not? There is no gray. A legit top 5 team talent-wise being a national title contender in the next season. Yes or no. And unless that player is like the best player in the country, and I don't know why that guy would be in the portal, why in the hell would you go out and try to get it? Because that's the only way a team that it's not in the top 5 or so is going to win it. That's just not realistic. So you have to look at these things a little bit differently now. I think Florida State has managed like the 24 class, the kids that have come in. I've got a list over here on some of the key players. Like I think Marvin could end up being the best transfer portal defensive end in the class, but they also got the other kid from Oregon State who might just be just as good. Florida State prioritized DJ. I think they should have went after somebody else. That's my opinion. But they did get a good quarterback. They got balance on their roster. It's going to be hard to beat them. I think they'll be in every game. I just don't think they're dynamic enough, especially with all the losses they had at receiver and quarterback, to make up for that and be a national title contender. They're on the second tier. They're going to be really good. Teams that are right there, though, I can see taking a Quintin Judkins. I understand at least the theory. I wouldn't done it. I wouldn't put up with a guy like that. It's a locker room problem that came from Ole Miss, went to Ohio State. It is what it is. But these are the questions that guys like Mike Norvell have to have with their staff all the time. And they're not going to talk about it publicly. They're going to deny, lie, and just go around those questions like crazy because they have no way to answer it honestly and not cause problems. They're not going to talk about how much they're going to spend. They're not going to bring up who got paid and who didn't. And they don't want anything to be discussed in terms of names because it pisses people off in the locker room. That's the problem with NIL. And if you don't believe me, look at the teams winning national titles. They don't use NIL as much. Take it for what it's worth. On that point, though, how well is Florida State using the portal? And is there anybody else in college football that does it better than the Noles in terms of recruiting high school kids, junior college players, and gaining transfers to merge together to make a roster? And think about this before I go into break. Florida State's roster, when Norvell got to Tallahassee compared to where it is now, it had been hard to do a whole lot better job than what he has done. So with that, take that into consideration because there's going to be a lot of topics to talk about. Let's talk about FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Bet on anything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So has anybody done better than Florida State with the portal? And I'm looking at some lists and some stats that I put together like I normally do. Kind of did my own rankings at a couple of positions with a whole bunch of criteria involved with it. It's not just who's the best. I'm not going to go in and list them all, but just have them on here for my own sake. It's interesting which teams got the best players at certain spots, at least in my opinion. A handful of the best players went to schools that were more mid-level power forward. I think they're just looking for playing time, while some other guys are trying to raise the team back up, like Cam Ward at Miami. They weren't near as good as they should have been last year. Then you got Dylan Gabriel fitting right in at Oregon. One really good quarterback leaves. He takes his time, does well at Oklahoma, and then he goes over to Oregon for a 6 year. He's going to fit in great. There's a lot of different things with these teams, like individual players here, there, and everywhere. But how many teams organize it, recruit it, and maximize it when you talk about high school, JUCO, and the portal? I think Florida State's the best. And I don't say that lightly because Georgia's in that mix. Georgia's the best overall program. I'm not saying that. That's pretty obvious. But they recruit so well at the high school level, it's just no comparison to anybody else. I think that if you look at the teams that are in between like the 5 and 15 range in recruiting, and then you combine the portal, Florida State is the best. And they have risen their program through their roster building, their roster management, better than any team in the country in the last 3 years. That's all you can really ask. Again, I'm not a huge DJ fan, but I think he's a hell of a lot better than some people do. And I think he's going to help them get to the year 2025 with a pretty good season and go to a pretty good bowl game. That's not bad. But starting in 25, because of that combination of players, junior college, high school, and transfers, Florida State should be a top 10 team pretty much every year, beginning in 25 until Norvell leaves. He understands how to recruit, how to evaluate, and he has the guys under him to make it happen. Here's an example. We all know that Florida State hasn't recruited the defensive line the way they should out of the high school ranks overall over the last, say, 10 years, specifically the last 4 or 5. They started to get a little bit better, but it's still not quite where it needs to be elite. It's just not. So they had to hit a home run at defensive end. They go out and get Marvin Jones Jr. That's going to help you. They got the kid from Oregon State, the other defensive end, another one of DJ's teammates, really good player. If you get those kind of guys to mix in with the kids they have coming back, they should be in pretty good shape. They have a chance to have a dominant defense again. They got DJ Lundy to come back. He was the best tackler in space in all of college football. He didn't even start last year for Florida State. Then, of course, the secondary is loaded. That's going to be a top-notch defense. If DJ can do the right things, they still got several of their transfers from the year before from the offensive line that are back in other spots. They should be in pretty good shape. And a lot of these guys are going to help bridge the gap for these high school players to come in, redshirt, or play a little bit like some of the kids did in 23. It'll be the same thing in 24. And then when you add this 25 class, which I think will be top 10, prove me wrong. Because them added with what I expect to be 2 or 3 more guys probably out of the portal, because I don't know who it'll be, but Florida State comes up with them the 16th through the 30th when the portal opens. Somebody out of that window is going to come in there, at least one, that Florida State's going to get that's going to help them next year, maybe even 2 years. They've done a great job with that. That's my opinion. Just for fun, I think that Marvin Jones has the best chance of any player in college football that's a transfer that didn't live up to his hype out of high school. He didn't do much at Georgia. He was a 5-star kid out of American Heritage, but he's super talented. I've seen him a couple of times live. If he comes in with the right mindset and the things that are happening, we've heard about him at Florida State's practice, if they transpire, Florida State has a chance to be a dominant team on defense this next year. And they might kind of flip the switch on how they did it, and they might surpass my expectations. If you had to say, Brian, you have to give it a specific record this year, I'd say 9-3 for Florida State. I think they could be 10-2 or 11-1 if he's elite, because you're going to have multiple defensive ends to go with that secondary. They could have a top 10 passing defense. Anytime you're in that category, you got a chance. So on that, I want you to think about a following question to match it up. The window's coming up again on the 16th, so it's back to the original question. Should Florida State pay for a top player when they're probably not an elite team. In other words, you have all the different things you can think about. You could answer it with another question like, well, is this guy good enough to get him from 9-3 to 11-1? It's got to be a dude. I had no idea who's going to enter the portal. It's always a crapshoot. But that's the key to it, and that's why it's so fascinating. Florida State isn't going to just throw out money and still go 9-3. Ohio State spent a whole bunch of money. They're trying to win the national title this year. I mean, a lot of the fans don't like Ryan Day, etc. Blah, blah, blah. Michigan won. They can't imagine Michigan ever winning. It's not a very realistic fan base. But at the same time, I get it. Florida State fans want to see their team take that next step. Should they take the chance this year? And would you pay, say, $500K for a top-notch inside linebacker or another defensive tackle, whatever it may be that you think would help the Noles? It's a really interesting topic to me because this is what college football has become. I follow recruiting in the high school ranks the traditional way, but the portal is impossible to follow because we don't know who's going to enter. And even when they do, I really don't have the chance to call these kids. They're not going to take calls, and even if they did, they wouldn't give me much. It is really, really random. All right, on the last segment, we're going to talk about something a little bit different, although somewhat related. Florida State is in the ACC, at least for now. I'll be talking a little bit more about the grant of rights coming up. But how much is that going to help them this year to at least, quote unquote, make a chance to get to the playoff? More on that in just a second. So Florida State's schedule has Miami on the road. They've got Notre Dame on the road, got Clemson at home. They got some tough football games. But if you look at the totality of Florida State's schedule, and I'm just going to pull it up, it's not like it's murderer's row. There's some oddball situations too. Like the game that I don't like is playing Georgia Tech on the 24th over. I don't like that game at all. Wears you out. Georgia Tech's better than what people think. And I'm very concerned that no matter what Norvell and his staff do, and I know they'll try to accomplish this, they're not going to get their players to focus on Georgia Tech the way they should. Georgia Tech hasn't been very good, but they have a future NFL quarterback, and Florida State screws around, they could lose that game. First games are goofy, 2-3 turnovers, whatever, new quarterback. There's a lot of things going on there. Florida State could lay an egg. That is a very big concern for me. Also worry about the Memphis game. Like that's the game. They've got a big-time veteran quarterback that's going to get drafted. I think that's a concerning game. But overall, I mean, Florida State's, they got a road game at SMU. They got a road game at Duke. Do I really care about that? North Carolina's at home. Florida's not that good. Florida State should win at least 9 games. But how much does it help them to be in the ACC? This league's a little better than I think it's given credit for, especially coming into this next year. It's got more quarterbacks. And Florida State is also going to be going against the everybody's going to circle you now situation because they were 13-0 last year. It's going to be a little harder. It's just something to think about when you go into a season. Are you the hunter or are you the hunted? I mentioned this recently on a show as well. Excuse me. And I hope that Florida State fans realize this season will not be anything like the last one. I'm not talking about personnel and all that. Everybody they're going against seems to have a veteran quarterback, a transfer quarterback, what have you, and they are going to circle the Noles. If they don't manage the transfer portal, that's why I'm focused on those comments that I did earlier in the show, and add a couple more pieces, it's going to be really hard just to get to 9-3. But at the same time, if they get the right pieces, they could be 10-2 or better. It's such a fine line. They don't have the depth they need at linebacker or defensive tackle probably, but they got good players, and they've got some really talented guys. I'm not naming names on intentional. I don't want to take anybody off. There's a couple of guys that I think are NFL players up front. They got to show it, but they have a chance to be. And they also have guys that just haven't had a chance to play yet. So we'll see because they had veteran linebackers. There's a lot of opportunity there. If they can find a couple more guys in the portal, you could change my mind, and that's hard to do. And Florida State could be a team that ends up in the playoff and making some noise. But that schedule, again, the mindset's got to be right. So if you pay kids, does it piss off the locker room? You could screw your season up before it even starts. There are so many detractors for paying kids straight out of the portal that haven't put in time before they got to this campus. It is a very slippery slope. Just something to think about. Last comment, and then I'm going to get out of here today. Florida State is now on the cusp of being a great program, which I mentioned earlier. If they can get through this season with 10 wins in the regular season, not counting the ACC title game, I think there's a chance that Florida State, I don't know if they'll ever hit Bowden dynasty era again, but they'll have a chance to win 10 games every year for at least the next 5 years in the regular season. Just think about that. Very few teams do that. Georgia and Alabama, Clemson, there was a short run of those teams, but that was about it. Even Ohio State and some others that kind of go through a year here or there where they screw up and don't make it. It's hard to do. Florida State finds a way to make it happen in 2024 and win 10 games. They find the right couple more pieces in the portal, hopefully without having to spend too much. They could find themselves in the college football playoff and making some noise again. With that, please like and subscribe to this podcast and share it. And finally, make sure you comment. I like it very much when I get a chance to interact with everybody. So please do so. And everybody have a great day.